There's been apparently a rise in like sexlessness. The problem is not that they're overstepping people's boundaries. The problem is that they're not taking any action at all in the first place because they're like almost ashamed of their masculinity, ashamed of offending someone. The top 20% of men online are getting 80% of the dates. A lot of men aren't doing very well. A lot of people don't know how to present themselves necessarily well online. So you have someone who may have a lot of great qualities, but they're putting these pictures up on the internet, you know, and it looks like they're living in like a dustbin. No one is kind of teaching that stuff to young men.
Tell me what you were like as a 17 to 23-year-old at university with regards to sex.
I didn't go to university till I was 23, but in the years between 17 and 23, I was not in education. I was quite reclusive. I smoked too much cannabis, stayed in the house a lot, lived in the countryside with my grandmother, had a small circle of friends, and therefore, as you can probably guess from all of those things, my dating life wasn't exactly popping off. It was I think I had a girlfriend at 16 and then spent the next 6.5 years single.
Okay, yeah, I read you talking about that time as sort of like an arid moment for you, and I related to that. And I was at university, the place where it's supposed to be happening, and there was so much pressure then. And I think I'm quite like a fun, chatty person, and I really struggled as well. And that brought about a lot of shame as well, because you're supposed to be at university, meeting loads of women, and all these things are supposed to be happening. But I had friends who were also going through the same thing. So what does that say to you about the young dating scene?
So, I mean, I think my problem was slightly different to that in that I just didn't leave the house a lot. And, you know, if you don't go out a lot, I mean, the same thing happens to a lot of people during lockdown. Your social skills kind of atrophy just from not using them. Then when you go out, you can make kind of a lot of social faux pas. You don't really know how to behave in a regular situation, let alone when you're asking somebody out. I think university, I think it can be even worse for you when you go into that environment like university where you're supposed to be living this certain lifestyle, you're supposed to be experimenting, you're supposed to be kind of sleeping around. And if you don't know how to kind of conduct yourself, how to ask somebody out, if you're not very assertive naturally, it doesn't feel like there's really, if you don't have a father figure maybe in your life telling you how to, or maybe if you do and they're giving you bad advice, if you don't know how to kind of conduct yourself in that way, how to ask somebody out, it can be very difficult. And it's made even worse when it feels like everybody else is like having sex all the time, but you aren't.
When you've said before that a lot of dating advice is written in such a way as to avoid cancellation, what do you mean by that? And also that I think a lot of it is written by gay people.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the... So I'm writing a book at the moment on the Manosphere, and one of the kind of early incarnations of the Manosphere was the pickup community, which came out of, reached the mainstream with Neil Strauss's book, The Game, in 2005. And one of the reasons that emerged, in my opinion, it emerged on internet forums, basic internet forums in the era of like dial-up internet. And one of the reasons it emerged is because I think mainstream dating advice, particularly for men, tends to be very bad or just non-existent. One reason for that is women, the romance has typically been the female realm, it's supposedly. So it's been, in the past, the pressure has been on women to find a husband. The pressure has been on women to find a partner. Yet we kind of enter the late 20th century, early 21st century, and everything's changed now. Marriage isn't necessarily, there isn't that cultural pressure to get married, which I think arguably is a good thing, especially for women. But at the same time, men don't necessarily know how to conduct themselves in the kind of dating environment. So it's it's kind of, you're told like either you're good looking, either you have it or you don't. And if you don't, it's like, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to kind of meet someone? So I think that's one of the reasons why I think the kind of pickup scene emerged. Like, for all its faults, it came out of a vacuum. And I also think a lot of the mainstream dating advice from men, particularly recently, it doesn't really talk about how to approach someone. For example, say you're in a bar or something, how to approach someone in a way that's respectful, but also assertive. Like, you have to actually put yourself out there. It tells people almost nowadays to like go on dating apps and it will just happen for you. It doesn't really tell you how to present yourself, for example, today on social media. It doesn't tell you anything about how to kind of have good photos, what a good photo looks like, how to create a good bio, and also how not to be kind of too needy. Because one of the issues I think with kind of mainstream dating advice, it's very good on talking about, politically correct dating advice. It's very good, and I think it's correct to talk about how people should be respectful of other people's boundaries. How, if you approach someone, they're not interested, you should apologize, back off, have a nice evening. That's that. You shouldn't be pushy at all. But I think a lot of the people who struggle in this area were like I was. They're not assertive. They're shy. The problem is not that they're overstepping people's boundaries. The problem is that they're not taking any action at all in the first place because they're afraid of, like, almost ashamed of their masculinity, ashamed of offending someone, ashamed of being kind of afraid of being rejected. So I think the mainstream dating advice is so concerned with kind of warning people not to overstep people's boundaries that it kind of doesn't cater at all to those people who they have a very different problem.
Are we going too far that way? Is there too much offense and fear? I know that, I've not been single for a long time now, and if I were, I would be petrified to approach someone, partly just because I don't want to be rejected, but partly because I might overstep some modern boundary that maybe wasn't necessarily there 10, 15 years ago. Do people still go up to people in a cafe and say hello, or is that now creepy?
No, I don't think it's a bad thing that there are these warnings about, not overstepping someone's boundaries, because there are people out there who behave in this entitled way, will go and, ask someone out, and the person isn't interested, and they'll take this in a very, they'll lash out at the person. And I think women often have to be polite to someone who approaches them because they fear that if they say no to someone, if they reject someone, that person will lash out. And I think, there is a tendency, if you spend a lot of time on social media where sometimes very shrill activist voices are very loud, I think it can lead you to think, if you approach someone, they might report you for harassment or something. I think, in the right context, I think that stuff is still going on as it always was. Like if you go out to a bar, if you go out to a club, people are kind of like hitting on someone else or just approaching someone because it's kind of accepted in that environment. There is a way to do it and a way not to do it, I think. And I feel like a lot of people, there's a vacuum. No one is kind of teaching that stuff to young men. No one is, there are kind of some charlatans on the internet. There's some good and bad advice you can find on platforms like YouTube. And some of it is pretty decent, but in the mainstream, if you're not going out there looking for it, there's nothing really teaching like a young man how to do, the right way and the wrong way to do that.
I keep seeing a statistic about 1 in 3 young men are sexless. Is that something you've seen, and what's going on there? Is that something to worry about?
I know there's been apparently a rise in like sexlessness, particularly among men and women, but particularly among men in recent years. I think, partly there's kind of, I think partly that's a consequence of people staying in more, not going out as much. People sometimes, I think, again, what we talked about earlier, your social skills can kind of atrophy if you're not putting yourself out there, if you're spending a lot of time on the cell phone, a lot of time online. I think that could be one factor. I also think dating apps are, I think this tendency to kind of compartmentalize different aspects of our lives. So now you're supposed to, if you want to find someone to date, I think, you're kind of pushed towards, I'll just go on a dating app, and the barrier for entry is really low. You just get a photo, just put a bio in, and then, you have these great hopes for, this is going to fix your dating life. You go on there, and then, your pictures maybe aren't very good. Your bio is maybe not what it should be. And then you get all of these kind of online rejections. And then you get people, young men particularly, just dropping out of the dating market. I'm not going to bother, or I'm going to wait till I've sorted my finances out, wait until I've sorted out these like lifestyle things, and then I'll try again. Whereas I actually do think the kind of a more old-fashioned way of actually putting yourself out there, joining, finding a hobby, finding people with similar interests to yourself, putting yourself in those environments to meet women, I think is better than dating apps for a lot of people. And I also think a lot of us, me included, a lot of people don't know how to present themselves necessarily well online. So you have someone who may have a lot of great qualities, but they're putting these pictures up on the internet, and it looks like they're living in like a dustbin or something. It's not. Yeah. For someone who knows nothing about you, they don't know how to put their best foot forward, if you like, online. And I think that's so important nowadays, and it sucks in many ways. Like many of us don't want to play that kind of online like status game or whatever. But I think if you're trying, and it seems corny and stuff, but I think if you're actually trying to put yourself out there, I think you need to learn the etiquette of what works and what doesn't on platforms like first of all, platforms like Tinder or Hinge or whatever, but also platforms like Instagram as well, where which is also almost a dating app nowadays.
Yeah. I wondered to what extent it is. I'm just thinking out loud here. Were we sold a lie in like the mid 1900s about this is how you have fun? You go out and you drink until you're blattered, and you're out at a club and you can't hear anyone or talk to anyone, and there's smoky things everywhere, and you wake up feeling terrible. And we were told that's what fun is. But then you speak to people and everyone's like, well, I don't know if I actually had fun. And people are drinking less now, aren't they? And maybe there are other things to life.
Yeah, I mean, 1990s, right? Not 1900s.
Yes.
I don't know that far. I can't remember that far back. But
I'm thinking back to like starting with Gatsby, and then sort of the big, like, we're having a big party.
Yeah.
Everyone's having fun, and people are like, I quite like sitting at home with a hot chocolate and playing a computer game.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's like I spent some time going out, like actually leaving the house over Christmas because catching up with old friends, and I think the cost of living has got something to do with it at the moment, because you can go to like Aldi and buy a good bottle of wine for like £9 or something. Then you go out to the pub and it's like 14 quid for two drinks. And I think that's kind of part of it. It's the cost of living and how expensive it is to actually go out nowadays. And yeah, I think you have an entertainment system at home. I think COVID changed a lot of this. So I find it's much harder to get some people to come out now since COVID, because they've got into these habits where it's like staying in all the time. They've got these subscriptions they got out during COVID. And I just think people do actually go out less. You see this with like retailers are struggling, like nightlife is struggling, like even post COVID. I think people got more during lockdowns, people got in this habit of staying in a lot more, doing things online, swiping a lot more instead of actually going out. And I think with the dating in particular, it just does feel easier to log on, set up a dating app profile and swiping. Whereas I think like approaching someone in person to meet them is difficult. It just is. It is like nerve wracking. It doesn't always go well, and I think it takes like practice to actually be able to do that. And the only people who've advocated that in the past have been kind of quite sleazy like pickup artists. So.
That's true, yeah. I'm sort of adding, I know it's quite a stereotypical thing for someone who's getting a bit older to do. I'm sort of adding things that we should have learned at school to the agenda. So taxes, posture, and I suppose that's one now as well, like how to talk to and approach women in a way that isn't sleazy and trying to get numbers and things, but just, in a respectful way that is also confident and that kind of thing. I think alcohol must have something to do with it as well. I knew a guy who ran a swingers bar in Canada, and then he set up a second one in Buenos Aires where they don't drink as much, and he just struggled because
no one's approaching.
Yeah, because people in Argentina don't have the same binge drinking culture we have in like Canada, America, the UK, Australia. We really binge drink. And in Buenos Aires, they sit with like a bottle of wine, and they basically sit there like for hours, and they haven't finished the wine yet. And he's like watching them like, come on. And it's like not getting them going. They won't get frisky or anything like that. So maybe alcohol has something to do with it.
Yeah, sure. Like social lubrication.
Social lubrication. Yeah, I like that. The beauty bias, right? I'm wondering, actually not beauty bias. Why is it that I'm always hearing that it's harder for men than women with dating? Because in my head, I'm just thinking, okay, well, it's 1 and 1. So like, if it's like, for example, you said before, it's harder for men at the moment getting sex. So how is that happening? There's the same amount of women as men. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's harder for men. I think it's different for men and women. Like it's harder in some ways for women and harder in some ways for men. So I think women, there's that Chris Rock scene, that joke about women just leaving the house and just being bombarded with this deluge of like dick. And it's I think women like tend to have to fend off creepers, and there are many more concerns about their safety. And even going on a date with someone, it's like they have to ask their friend, I'll text you when I get home and stuff. And whereas as a guy, that's not something you really worry about as much. So I think women, have to take a lot more care in vetting who they go out with, vetting who they, bring back to their house, vetting who they even give their personal details to, their phone number to. Because if sometimes, if they decide they don't like that person, that guy is then going to be blowing up their phone for the next month or more. It's like this is harder for women. But then for men, I think it's, it can be just harder to even be noticed at all. So I mean, whereas women are kind of can be fending off like creepy guys and stuff. With men, I think, especially on social media, unless you have like status, unless you know exactly how to present yourself online, unless you're like good looking, stereotypically good looking, conventionally attractive, it can be very hard to be noticed at all. You're just one of this kind of, it just feels like you look on the comments of any attractive woman's social media, and there's just this deluge of men writing about the smiley faces and stuff. And I think kind of knowing how to navigate that can be very confusing for young men, especially because so much of that goes on online now. And I think also the onus is on men to approach in real life as well. So there was a study, I think a survey, which I think was reported by The Guardian. It was, I can't remember the exact figure, but it's around 8 out of 10 women still expect a man to make the first move in terms of approaching or asking them out. So there is still that, it's still down to men to kind of take the risk to put themselves out there to make the first move. And I think that goes right through the process. So men are expected typically, again, it's not always true, but typically men are expected to ask someone out. Men are expected to kind of to make the first move in terms of suggesting, where you go on a date. Men are expected to make the first move in whether you go home together or whether you have a second date.
Do you think that's biological or societal?
I'd imagine like anything, it's both. I mean, it's again with the element of risks that's involved for women in these kind of situations. Often, I think it does make sense for men to be the ones who kind of are expected to move things forward. And I also think women take longer to evaluate a man in terms of whether he's like a suitable dating prospect, I think, and weigh up a lot more different factors where I think men tend to be a bit more shallow. And there probably are, I mean, I don't know, I'm not an expert on this, but there probably are some like evolutionary reasons for this, because there's more risk involved for a woman in getting pregnant with the wrong person,
Oh yeah, that's a great point. What is the 80-20 bias I'm always hearing about?
It's essentially this is the theory anyway, that the top 20% of men online are getting 80% of the dates.
Okay.
Basically. So you have like 80% of women chasing the 20% of men online. The thing with this is it tends to be true on like a dating app like Tinder, where it's very superficial, where it's all about the photo. There's not even much of it's done on the bios people write. It's almost all done on photo. So if you look on Tinder, I think OkCupid had some stats like this as well. It does show that a very small percentage of men are doing very well, but apart from that, a lot of men aren't doing very well. I think one thing that I've noticed recently is some people are transposing this onto real life, whereas I think in real life it's a lot more complicated. You do have like most sex still happens within monogamous relationships. There's there isn't this big kind of sense of inequality where it's just like a small bunch of men like Dan Bilzerian with these kind of supposed harems. But online, this is why I say to anyone who asks me about this, like particularly young men, is like you should actually try and date in the real world, because unless you're presenting yourself in this very particular way on an app like Tinder, it's just going to be very hard for you.
Yeah, I mean it's been 10 years since I've used it, but I never got dates or anything from it. I never felt, and we're presentable young men. Did you ever feel like you were in that sort of top 20%?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I met my girlfriend on Hinge, so my profile was obviously okay. But at the same time, I did spend quite a lot of time speaking to people who had better profiles than me, asking what they did. I got good photos taken. I had good photos from the things I did with work, public speaking, things like that.
Professional.
I mean, so it does kind of convey the right things. It like eventually I did get to a place where it was actually quite good. But you do have to kind of work on this stuff. And I think that's an area where, again, I think women know that they have to work on this stuff. They know that they have to get decent photos. They know that they have to present themselves well. Where I think as men, we haven't for a long time, because it's been, for a long time, we kind of, that wasn't how we found a partner historically. Whereas I think the men who do really well on dating apps, who do really well on meeting people through Instagram, they aren't always necessarily the most good looking people or the most high status people, but they know how to present themselves very well online. And yeah, sometimes that can stray over into fakery, which I wouldn't endorse that, but there is a way to present yourself which is better than what a lot of people are doing. I mean, I've had friends who showed me their dating app profiles because they're like, I'm not getting any matches, and it's like there's nothing wrong with them, and then they'll show me and it's like these photos are terrible. It's like you could just spend a bit of money getting some professionals photos taken, or you could, when you go out, get someone to opportunistically just take a photo while you're having a good time with friends or something. But you have to actually think about it and invest in it a little bit. And you can't just like throw up anything and just be like, oh, you know, I'm not getting any matches, and you know, woe is me. And you have to actually, I mean, that's where I agree with something I heard Jordan Peterson say a while ago. Like there's a lot of things I disagree with him about, but he's said before, you know, you need to actually look at yourself and say, am I what I'm presenting to the world, is it actually, you know, is it a good offer, you know, or am I doing something wrong, instead of blaming like other people.
Whenever someone mentions Jordan Peterson on the podcast, I have to ask if you can do an impression.
No, I can't. Especially not this time of the day. No.
Make your bed, bloody.
No, I can't. Maybe I'll think on it and maybe try later, but I can't at the moment. No.
Make your bed, buckle. You know? Well, he says to level up, and this isn't that. Jordan Peterson's really interesting. Of course, he's a really controversial figure, but I've had so many people who don't know who he is and don't know what he said, just automatically dislike him and automatically go, oh, he must be some far right, whatever. But on psychology rather than politics, my experience of listening to him is that he's actually telling these young men to sort of level up, rather than like, oh, you're owed something by women, which maybe an Andrew Tate might be telling women. Do you find that?
Yeah, so I mean...
Telling men, sorry.
Yeah, so I mean, Jordan Peterson, again, I have many disagreements with him politically. I think he's gone in a bit of a weird direction as well, gone slightly conspiratorial recently. In terms of politics, I mean, talking about communists and stuff all the time. But some of his self-help advice in terms of, you know, I remember watching him on one occasion say, you know, to an audience of men who are kind of frustrated with the kind of dating environment, him saying to them, you know, are you really the hidden gem you think you are? Or could you perhaps, instead of blaming women, could you perhaps look at yourself and say, you know, could I improve in this area? You know, could you be going to the gym? Could you be, you know, working on your dress sense more? Could you be working on your confidence, your social skills, your sense of humor? These are all things that you can work on. So I think I profoundly disagree with this idea that the dating like environment is necessarily just rigged against certain people. Yes, there's a small number of people who... the incel community, there's a small number of people in that community who struggle with kind of physical issues, where it can be much harder for them yes, you have people with severe disabilities with autism. Of course, it's going to be much harder for them. And those people do have my sympathy, but then you do have a lot of other people who are fairly normal looking, who could just do a few things like go to the gym, get better clothes, you know, work on their financial situation so they can, like, they have a better lifestyle, present themselves better on social media, and they're not doing any, like, do all of those things and then come back to me and say, you know, oh, it's terrible, you know, women are terrible and it's all women's fault. Then we can have a conversation. But I almost all of those people are not doing any of those things, and then they're blaming women for their own lack of success. It
makes me think of the growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Do you know about the concept? I think it was Carol.
Vaguely.
Carol. Someone will correct me in the comments. Carol. I want to say Carol Dweck. Caroline Dweck. I don't know. But it's something I've been trying to apply to my own life a little bit. I've noticed it in myself. Like, we all have elements of fixed mindset and growth mindset. And the fixed mindset is when you're looking at something often and going like, well, I think you're subconsciously sometimes telling yourself that you couldn't do it, and then because of that you disparage the whole thing. So I'm trying to think of things like fashion. I've never been good at fashion. I don't know anything about fashion, so I've always decided, well, it's such a superficial, stupid thing anyway. And I'm trying to really analyze that. Like, is the reason I don't like it because I know I'm not good at it and I don't understand it? And I think that can sometimes be the case. I think what you're saying is maybe some of these people can have a growth mindset, which I think Jordan Peterson really encourages, which is like, hey, these women, you know, they don't have to have you. They don't have to accept you. You've got to make it so that you're a better option for them. Like you say, go to the gym, work out, get into that, rather than having the fixed mindset of like, oh, I don't want to do it, and they're all terrible anyway.
Yeah, and I think if I look back at the kind of my time in my late teens, early 20s, when I didn't have any success in this area, I found it very hard to like meet people. I think I also had a bigger ego about this stuff then. So I felt like, you know, people should just accept me for who I am, even though I had these very high standards for other people. So even though I had these very high standards in terms of who I'd be friends with, or I was very judgmental, had high standards, I think, in terms of who I thought was a, you know, girlfriend material. Yeah, I didn't really look at myself. You know, I thought, people should just accept me for who I am.
Yep.
And this is kind of hypocritical, isn't it? It's like you have to be honest about yourself, and you can't have an ego about rejection. And it's very difficult. Like it took me a long time to kind of get to that place. So, you know, if you have this big ego around being rejected, so you have this kind of inflated idea of yourself, you're never going to go and approach someone, or you're never going to try and meet someone, because you don't want that like ego of yourself, that kind of idea you've created of yourself to be deflated. Because if you actually put yourself out there, you're then subjecting yourself to kind of real life. It's a real life experiment almost. You get that. Are you actually who you think you are? Are you actually the shit? Like you in your own head, you may think you're the shit, but if you put yourself out there, you risk that kind of entire edifice kind of collapsing.
Yeah.
Whereas I think real self-confidence comes from putting yourself out there. Yes, you'll get rejections, but then gradually improving, and over time, people start. You kind of find that people can genuinely start to like you, because you're not going in with that kind of ego. You're not going in with that sense that you need them to like you. And paradoxically, I think that makes people more likely to like you when, like, if you feel like this kind of value leech, like every interaction you're going into, it feels like the other person gets this sense that you need it to work. You need something from them. You need them to like you. I think, that it's kind of like this weird energy.
Yeah.
Whereas if you get into this more relaxed space where it doesn't really matter to you, you know who you are, you know your value system, you know that you're doing the right things in life, and then you go try and talk to someone, or you put yourself out there, I think people feel that energy a bit more, and it's just like, oh, like this person, who's this person? They don't want anything from me. It doesn't feel like there's a downside to kind of talking with you.
That's a really interesting point, actually, because I know, like, if somebody wants to sell me something, I'm immediately pushing away. And as you say, like, women are getting constantly sold this, and they don't want to feel like they're being sold to. If I think back to when I was younger, where I was going wrong as well, I think I really wanted a girlfriend rather than sex or whatever, and I think that probably came across as needy, even though I didn't mean for that. Whereas the guys who were out for one night stands probably had a bit of an, it was
nonchalance, that kind of nonchalance. Yeah, definitely. And I think this is a misconception, I think, about a lot of these younger men who struggle in this area, is this idea that they're only doing this because they're horny and just want to have sex. And it's like, yeah, there is a part of that as an adolescent male. But same with me. I was just lonely and wanted a girlfriend, and but people feel that off of you.
Yeah.
Whereas when you do start to do a bit better, when you start to get some dates and stuff, you do become a bit more nonchalant. You don't need it to work. And again, paradoxically, things tend to go better then, because you're not giving off those kind of needy kind of clingy vibes, which is, a very unattractive thing, I think, to both sexes.
Yeah. I read a short story by a writer called Ted Chiang recently, where they are able to inject people's brains or whatever, like turn off the receptor that sees beauty, to get rid of beauty bias and those kinds of things. And they did it in certain schools, like the high schools you're growing up, and these people didn't know if they were good looking or if their friends were good looking or anything. And when they got to like 18, they had the choice if they wanted to turn it off, and some did. And it was a fascinating idea. Do you think that would be good for society or bad for society?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds kind of Black Mirror like. No, that's fascinating. I think I think the phrase kind of unplugging from the matrix has become a bit there's like negative connotations to it now, because someone like Andrew Tate uses the matrix a lot. But I think unplugging from social media a bit, like if you spend a lot of time on platforms like Instagram or, again, dating apps, I think you can kind of absorb this idea that everything is about materialism, everything is about these superficial things. Like, you have to look a certain way to meet somebody. You have to have this certain lifestyle, like the Bugattis, or present this certain lifestyle on social media to meet someone. Otherwise, women are just not going to be interested in you. And it's just these 10% of men, clearing up and with these harems and stuff. I think you unplug from that, put yourself out there. And it doesn't have to be like bars and clubs. I use bars and clubs as an example, because I think that was where I started to work on my social skills when I was younger, because there's a lot of people there. There's a lot of people to talk to. They won't remember you if it doesn't go well. If you get rejected, it doesn't matter. No one's going to remember. There are no social repercussions, really.
Yeah.
As long as you behave, respectfully, there's no real social repercussions. And I had like a thing where I'd be like, right, I'm going to go and like try and meet like 5 new people tonight. I'd go out with a friend. We both like I hated nightclubs. I hated those kind of places. Felt like I wasn't cool enough to be there. But over time, you kind of become acclimatized to those places. You don't feel like this weird outsider, and your social skills do begin to slowly improve. You realize that it's not necessarily about what you look like. It's not necessarily about how much money you've got. It's about the kind of vibe. That's kind of a woo-woo term, but it's kind of about the kind of energy that you have when you're out there, the vibe you have. And I think like that, I think kind of once you get in the real world a bit more and get away from this kind of superficial presentation like aspect of this stuff. So everyone on, or if you spend a lot of time on Instagram, it feels like everyone's having more sex than you. Everyone's living this more kind of luxurious lifestyle than you. That a lot of those people are hiring out these Lambos and Bugattis and getting photos next to them. And a lot of this stuff is just there's so much fakery involved. And then when you actually put yourself out there, you realize actually that stuff is kind of, that's not really how the world works. It's the old fashioned ways are still, the biological imperatives are still kind of there. You just have to put yourself out there and you see that it's not always about these superficial things.
Do you think it matters if we are having less sex in general? I know population decline might be collapse is an issue. But.
Yeah. I mean, I think long term it clearly does matter if people are having less children. But I think there are so many different factors for that. So I mean, in the UK at the moment, I think one reason friends of mine are having fewer children in my age group. So I'm 41. Millennials, like I'm an older millennial, I suppose. But a lot of people in my age group, it feels like having fewer children because the cost of living. So it's hard to find somewhere stable to live. A lot of them are renting. A lot of them are having to commute a long time to the long distances to the places they work. And it feels like people are putting that on hold till kind of the economic situation perhaps improves a bit. I think also just, children are hard work, I assume. I mean, I have a cat and that's hard work. So, I think it's children are hard work. I think maybe we can be a bit more selfish in that respect nowadays, a bit more kind of solipsistic. So it's a bit more kind of, we think about our own, like a bit more narcissistic, fulfilling our own goals, ambitions, and whereas I think, say my grandparents' generation, it's a bit more like you have a child, and then to some extent you live vicariously through the child, like to some aspect. I think there can be negative connotations to that as well, but I think we've kind of gone in a kind of different direction, and now it's more about the self, and a lot of people don't want to sacrifice any of that to be a parent. It's all about self-optimization and just pursuing your own kind of ambitions.
I'd argue that to an extent, both of those options, having children and going about yourself, are both selfish endeavors to an extent. Like they're both aspects of the status game. And as you said, living vicariously through your children. I don't know. I've noticed that with some friends of mine, those who are really ambitious and probably get their status from like, look how good my job is or my sport that I play or whatever it might be, are delaying having children. Whereas a lot of people who seem to be maybe less concerned with that aspect of status, jobs and sports and things, have children a little younger, and then their status, their Instagram photos and how they're known as like a mother. I am now a mother, as opposed to maybe the woman I knew who was 18 and was excited to be embarking upon a marketing career or whatever. Now their role is mother, and they're just as excited as someone else might be in another sort of status game. So maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's pros and cons of both, because you can have people who have children and then live vicariously through their children, and that can be a very high pressure environment for the children because they feel like they've got certain certain standards to live up to. But again, I suppose at the moment it's like for me and I would like to have children at some point, but for me and like again a lot of people my age and younger, that story of why you should have children isn't as strong as it perhaps was in the past, because in the past it was something you kind of just did. There was like a process. Yeah. You finish school, you get a certain type of job often, and then you get married and you have children. And that kind of story is broken down a lot in various aspects. So even the kind of stable job idea of the 20th century, I wrote a lot about that in my last book, Hired. The idea of a lot of these working class communities have broken down because that old structure, you get an industrial job, you join a trade union, you get married, you have a family, you can get a house relatively cheaply, either to rent or usually to buy. You put down roots, and then the idea is you do this generation after generation. That obviously didn't last. I mean, capitalism has kind of uprooted those communities, and it's also uprooted the kind of the cultural realm as well. So you have like dating apps now where you don't have to and again, you don't have to settle down with the first person you meet, and many of those changes are good. I think like when you don't want to romanticize the past overly, but it also brings fresh challenges. I think you don't want to romanticize the present and technology and progress either. You have to see that this brings new challenges, and one of those is populations are declining, the birth rate's declining, and you look at a country like Japan, which has had this issue for several decades now, and that's led to like economic stagnation, and there are a whole bunch of challenges that come with that as well.
Yeah, it's so hard, isn't it? Because it's like we've got to weigh up individual liberty, like go and do what you want, with like, well, yeah, but your individual experience is not going to be good if the whole collective is suffering because we're not having enough children. So then bring kids into the world that you don't want to bring into the world. I mean, it's such a difficult conundrum. What about, have you given any thought to sort of the future? I mean, I guess, I don't know if anyone would have seen dating apps as they are coming decades ago. What might happen as we go decades into the future? And what is the latest now on dating? Because I'm a bit behind.
Yeah, I mean, so there was a dating app that was developed, and quickly kind of that plan was aborted. It was to match people according to like their DNA samples. So a bit like Ancestry, the website Ancestry, or 23andMe, I think.
My Heritage.
Well. Yeah, those websites. Like I've done this with Ancestry. I've sent my DNA, and it tells you where your family's from and originally, and all this stuff. And there was a company that kind of was promoting that for dating. So you'd match someone who was genetically, I can't remember what it was exactly, but they got accused of eugenics, of basically promoting eugenics.
Yeah.
Because matching people in terms of it's quite a Black Mirror-ish type scenario. So I mean, I do think that will be something like that will be tweaked and re-released. But again, I just think it's to me that's a bit creepy. That is again in the realm of like Black Mirror. And again, I still don't really believe in that kind of matchmaking, because I think you can have dating which is, formulated like a catalog, where you're scrolling through the catalog and you pick someone who's like on paper is the best match for you. But then you meet them in person and there's just something about their vibe, or there's just something completely off, and you just feel no chemistry for them. Because I think with this, with dating, there are all these variables you can't even see almost. So I mean, Mia Levitin, a journalist, she wrote a book she went on like 100 odd dates from Tinder and then wrote a book about it. And she found that, a lot of the people she had previously dated in real life, she would have not swiped, if she would have swiped, I can't remember left or right, but she would have rejected them online.
Left. Swipe right, that's like the good one.
So she would have swiped left for them because they didn't necessarily have the characteristics on paper that she would have been attracted to. But then when you meet someone in real life, you can just find them attractive, and you may not have the same things in common. You may not do the same job. It can be lots of different things, but they may not be your type in terms of the color hair they have or something. But you can be very attracted to them, and I think it's very hard to kind of formalize dating so much. That it's like this catalog thing, because you can just meet someone and then have this chemistry.
Eugenics gets a bad rap, right? But
what I think to say.
Well, it killed like loads of my ancestors. I think Jewish people are allowed to talk about eugenics. No, I don't know, but I do wonder if the Nazis hadn't sort of been the ones that we now know as the people doing it. Would we now be looking more at that? Is it sort of like a taboo topic where, because maybe there is some science behind like, hey, you can date people based on your DNA, like you say, maybe that is actually relevant, but nobody would dare go there.
I mean, no, I mean, it kind of had a bad rep. I mean, the Nazis, of course, gave it the very bad rep, but I mean, there were people talking, like the Fabians, for example, there were people in the Fabians talking about eugenics prior to, in the 20s and 30s. There's a book called The Intellectuals and the Masses, and it's about intellectuals in the 20s and 30s, early 20th century, who a lot of them did support eugenics, and a lot of that stuff strayed into we need to use poison gas against the lesser breeds, whether that was the working class, whether that was people in the colonies.
Sure.
So there is kind of this idea of kind of genetic superiority is an idea which lends itself to persecuting or trying to weed out people who are supposedly like lesser breeds, and this, there is a kind of direct pathway from that to the kind of some of the genocides we saw in the 20th century.
Yeah, you can't have that.
But there is kind of there is utility to using genetic testing. For example, I have this, I'm a carrier of a gene where if I have a kid with someone else with the same gene, there's a 25% chance that the kid would be severely anemic.
Is that right?
So yeah, it's basically a gene that's common in the Mediterranean, And all it does to me is my red blood cells are slightly different shape, but it makes no practical difference. But if I had a kid with someone with the same who carried the same, I can't remember the name of it now, it's very long, carried the same condition, they would 25% chance of a kid with severe anemia. So I do think in that sense genetic testing can be very useful, but it's a kind of weird premise to use to like, am I going to be attracted to that person? It's too
It is Black Mirror.
It completely demystifies all that's good about romance and love and stuff. I mean, who wants to just have a kid with someone who maybe they'd have very healthy genetic offspring, but maybe they would just not find that person attractive. Maybe they would not be a very good match at all. Maybe it'd be hellish spending time in that person's company. Do we really want to reduce love and romance to just that mechanical process?
But that's if you use eugenics to see how you would have the best offspring. But what if you used it? Now I sound like a proponent of eugenics. I'm just saying, what if you use people's DNA to find who would be your ideal match? Because there's obviously the old idea of the soulmate, but presumably of the 7 billion people on the earth, it's very unlikely that you've met the best possible match for you in terms of both attraction, offspring, getting on with one another, just having a nice relationship. And if there was some way, and I suppose obviously DNA is not going to be enough to tell you about that, but it's a nice thought. That's what they did in that Black Mirror episode.
Yeah, although I would say, yeah, that's right, actually. I remember that was a good one. I think it would be impossible, really, because I think so many of the variables that make someone attractive to you, they can't even be learned behaviors. So, I mean, if you look at like personal development, it can be about cultivating certain qualities, which I believe you can do. So you can become more assertive.
Yeah.
I learned that myself. I was as a kid and teenager, I was an incredibly shy person. But I basically learned how to become more assertive. Again, I wouldn't say it's necessarily something that comes naturally to me, but I definitely feel you can learn how to do that. And someone might find that attractive, but it's your genetics maybe aren't going to tell you anything about that, because you're not predisposed to being like the most extroverted person in the room, but it's something you've kind of worked on. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not sure that you would necessarily get the best match, is what I would say about that.
The book was not The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, it was The Bell Curve, and was, the authors argue, human intelligence is substantially influenced by both inherited and environmental factors, and that is a better predictor of many personal outcomes, including financial income and job performance. But I think that was sort of vaguely debunked as well, that book.
Yeah, I mean, it's my position is like nature and nurture. I mean, there's clearly stuff we're predisposed to, especially with kind of, so something like writing, for example, I have people in my family who writers, it seems a bit of a coincidence that was the one thing I was good at in school, and I was not good at like maths and stuff. But then also, if you're not in an environment where you can bring that out, it doesn't come out, does it? If I'd had a very different childhood, then I maybe wouldn't have been able to go to college and university to even pursue that. So it's environment and nature, I'd say. Yeah,
you'd have to find, like, if you had been adopted and then, my biological parents, it turns out, had been writers as well. That would be really interesting to know.
Yeah, and so I have a kind of weird experiment in that I have 3 siblings from a different father to me. And we had kind of mostly the same like upbringing. But then I'm very different from them in lots of ways. So you can kind of see that there's an aspect of biological, not determinism, but biological influence there. But then in other ways, we do share certain values, I feel, that we've got from relatives that have kind of been instilled in us.
You've been writing this book about the manosphere. What are some of the key, what surprised you writing about it? Has anything surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of stuff has surprised me. I mean, I'm just trying to think, because it's such a big subject in many ways. I think
what is the manosphere for those who don't know? Because some people won't know what the manosphere is.
Yeah, so the manosphere is kind of online. It starts online. It's not just online communities, but it's an online kind of anti-feminist space that goes from what started out as fairly apolitical. So you had like pickup artists, and goes all the way to like the red pill movement, and even like bleeds into like MAGA and. You have like nowadays like incels, and men going their own way. It's kind of an anti-feminist movement that's concerned with men's issues and adopts this kind of very stereotypical view of the gender binary. So it's kind of a hyper-masculinist movement that thinks men should be like real men, and women should be like more feminine. And I mean, that's kind of the gist of it.
At its most subtle, is that what we were talking about before with Jordan Peterson and telling men like, hey, come on, pull your socks up, and women don't necessarily have to go out with you unless you're a good enough mate, kind of thing. Can it be a force for good is what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Peterson I'd call more like Manosphere adjacent. I feel like it's, I mean, again, as much as I have my issues with some of the things he talks about, I think it would be unfair to him to call him like a Manosphere, strictly Manosphere. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I wouldn't say he's as extreme as a lot of people in the Manosphere. I mean, I wouldn't really compare Jordan Peterson to someone like Andrew Tate. Okay. I think Jordan Peterson is a fairly traditional conservative. I feel like it would be a bit unfair to him to bracket him with people who say that women shouldn't have the vote. And I think someone may correct me, but I've never heard him saying anything like this. I mean, when he talks about culturally enforced monogamy, that was, again, to be fair to him, like, I think that I believe in women's liberation, but I think he was kind of wildly misinterpreted when he talked about marriage as the culture kind of encouraging people to get married, encouraging people to form these stable family units. He wasn't talking about the law forcing people to get married. I think that's, that would make him a manosphere figure, but I don't think he's really strayed into that territory.
Interesting. And then, so like we've both been on Chris Williamson's Modern Wisdom, and I think some people have suggested, oh, that's sort of a manosphere podcast, but I think he's moved to deny that. So,
yeah.
So manosphere would be a much more extreme, pejorative, and less helpful kind of idea.
Yeah, no, I think like Chris Williamson, I think he's more of a self-help. It's more men's self-help, but it's more self-help. I wouldn't call him manosphere at all. It's a lot of the red pill stuff. It's almost a postmodern movement. A lot of those people will disregard data and evidence that doesn't that contradicts what they believe, and will kind of, it's quite pseudoscience-y as well. I think the manosphere does tend to be more extreme. It does tend to have a much more simplistic view of male-female relations. And at the extreme end, it wants to remove basic civil rights from women. And I don't think, I think it would be really unfair of me to bracket people who are just in the men's kind of self-help movement to bracket them with people like that.
Do you think, so there is a space for sort of men's self-help? Is that quite necessary in today's world?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think Richard Reeves, for example, the academic, wrote a really good book on areas in society where men are falling behind. So, for example, university education, there's far fewer men go to university now than women go to university, and that gap is getting bigger. You have, male suicide is far more men commit suicide than women. And you also have, I've had an issue before where I had a woman who stalked me. And stalking happens to women a lot more than men, but it also happens to men. And it does feel like, I think sometimes that there are certain conversations around like domestic violence or stalking, or, basically issues of equality where men are falling behind, or where men don't get any attention for their issues, because
what happened? Sorry, tell us about that.
Oh no, it was just someone who spent kind of it was about 2 years just kind of pursuing me online. I'd met them in real life, but it got very extreme. So they're using kind of fake emails, email addresses pretending to be me. Social media accounts purporting to be me, contacting employers, spreading kind of malicious made up rumors, contacting like my girlfriend, contacting her family. It was just this deluge of like craziness, basically.
Had you spurned her advances? Was that what started it?
Yeah, it was someone who I'd like got together with like 3 times. Like we'd hooked up a few times. Like this is several years ago, and then we kind of broke it off. I didn't see her again. And someone who clearly had like mental health problems, but then I became this target for that. I got in the crosshairs of the wrong person, basically. But it doesn't feel like it. I wrote about that for the newspaper, and as I did research for that, it's kind of how rare those stories are actually given any kind of platform. You're given any kind of platform to tell that story, because yeah, it does happen to women a lot more, but you kind of, when you say that you're a man who's been through that, it feels like people take it less seriously. It's kind of, oh, you should be like flattered. I remember someone even said, oh, you should be like flattered or something. And it's like, yeah, but you don't really understand what this entailed.
How did that feel when that person said that?
Again, it just felt like I just didn't feel like they would say that if a woman said they'd had a stalker, and lots of women do have stalkers. Lots of women, female friends of mine have had stalkers, and it's a horrible experience. But I don't feel like they would say that. I don't feel like they'd be so flippant about it. And I think, again, like I've never been a victim of domestic violence, but I have met men who have before, who have suffered violence at the hands of a woman, and it's a very difficult thing for them to admit publicly because they feel less of a man for doing so, and also because the reaction they get from other people is often treats them as less of a man for having as they would see it, having let them that happen to themselves.
Mm-hmm. My fiance does martial arts. Should have me. Luckily she's not violent, but I don't mean to make light of the situation, but and so that's the helpful Manosphere side, and then obviously it can become quite extreme and is incels where it leads to. And then I'm always hearing different accounts like, oh, incels are very dangerous, and then other people saying like, no, that's actually misconstrued, and the data shows that very few lead to like the school shootings and things like that. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to so kind of the beginning of the narrative of my book it's not really pickup art is a part of it, but it's also kind of, there's like Robert Bly and the mythopoetic men's movement, and like men coming together and kind of getting in touch with those kind of traditional male archetypes and stuff, which is similar to what Jordan Peterson talks about now. But you also had, like in the 90s and 2000s, you had the kind of early pickup artist movement getting together on the internet. And some of that was relatively benign. It was like how to approach someone in a coffee shop without just being either super needy or just being weird or creepy. Just kind of, which to me is kind of the self-help aspect of that. Like there was aspects of it like sort your fitness out, make yourself a better prospect for the person you're going to be dating, sort your finances out, get a better place to live, get better clothes. Have something to say in a conversation that's not just like an interview style question with someone you meet in a bar or something. So it's not just, what's your name? What do you do for a job? Where do you live? Blah, blah. And it's just like this boring, have something slightly left field to say. I don't think that was necessarily bad, but what came with that was often this very regressive view of like gender roles, based on some of it on kind of a bastardized version of evolutionary psychology, where it's like women are like this, men are like this, and if you press these button, if you say these specific things, it's like a woman is like a piece of computer software; she will automatically like you. And I mean, there was kind of this misogynistic undercurrent to a lot of that stuff. Yes. And also treating women is very objectifying, not necessarily in the traditional sense, but it's objectifying in that you treat women at a bar as just sets. It's like you have this very militarized language. You treat women as just like, I'm going to approach these women and the feedback, they'll give me feedback, then I'll adjust my game. You're not really seeing them as human beings anymore. And I think some of that then led into the red pill stuff and the men going their own way. They were like, oh, the pickup stuff doesn't work, but they still took on the old view of women as kind of not quite equal to men, basically.
Is that what it means to be red pilled?
Yeah, I mean, to me, being red-pilled, so to be red-pilled in these communities, it means like in the Matrix, like you've taken the red pill and you've seen the world for how it really is, and you've seen how the truth of the world, you've seen the truth of female nature and how women really are, which is basically, according to the red pill, it's like women are superficial, hypergamous, so they just go after the most high-status guy, they're ruthless, they'll screw you over unless you do all of these things and have red pill awareness.
Some of that's true of both sexes, isn't it?
Yeah.
This idea that men don't also go for the best possible woman. Like, what does that even mean? Like, of course we all do. We all go for whoever we like the most. That's just life.
Yeah, and there's a huge amount of hypocrisy as well around, so men are allowed to spin plates and sleep around. And a lot of these guys were in pickup as well. So they're teaching men that you should go out and have as much promiscuous sex as possible. And then at the same time, they're really concerned about what a woman's body count is. So if a woman slept around a bit, it's like, oh, she's ruined, she's been run through. And they'll cite these kind of pseudo-scientific studies to say that, oh, the woman can't pair bond anymore, which is, a woman can't form an emotional attachment to someone anymore. And, I like with some of this stuff, there's an element of you want to be realistic about dating. So when I first started to get dates, I would be quite naive about things. So, I'd be I kind of fall in love with someone very quickly, do all these, make these like kind of cheesy romantic gestures.
I did that.
Yeah, and then find out the girl, the woman I'm kind of doing this stuff, like having this interaction with, she's already sleeping with this guy who's kind of a dick from like, from college or something.
Yeah.
And then you kind of realize, all right, now I need to maybe not be a dick, but you need to have a bit of edge to your personality. You can't just be this kind of pushover, this kind of nice guy. And you have to understand that you don't want to put women on a pedestal because, they're human, but that's not from a position of, being like a misogynist, but from the position that they're also human beings like us. I'm superficial in some ways. I'm selfish in some ways. Like you said, I want to meet someone who's the best prospect for me. And women have every right to be like that as well. So, you shouldn't get butthurt when someone's like that. You should just kind of recognize it for what it is, that you're not owed anything as a man or a woman. You're not owed anything, and you shouldn't be entitled. You should recognize that other people have their own self-interest as well.
Yeah, that was something I had to learn myself. That was, these outlandish gestures when I was like 18, 17, like if I met a girl, do all these things, and I didn't realize at the time that's putting a lot of pressure on them, and it's like a really entitled thing to do. So now to me, it's a bit of a red flag if I see a guy who just only does these huge gestures all the time, and it's like, yeah, but what are you expecting back from that, and what kind of pressure are you putting on the other person?
Yeah, exactly, and it goes back to kind of the Madonna whore complex. It's like this, where feminists have this kind of idea that men have this view of women. They put them in the like she's either a slut or a princess, or like a Madonna or a whore, and it's like they'll treat they'll idealize some women and treat them almost as beyond human beings, put them on a pedestal. And you have to realize that, and then when that woman, behaves in a human way, they're just like bitterly disappointed and will just like lash out. And there's this resentment that like, oh, all these women are like this. And it's like, no, everyone's different. We're all human beings, and you can't just put people on a pedestal like that. And if you do, you will be disappointed. And I also think, this like when I first like was not having any success in this, not having any success at all in the area of dating, I would I'd be kind of very needy, very kind of compliant, very and not very assertive, and like with the red pill stuff, there is some of that stuff which is like you shouldn't be putting people on a pedestal. You should kind of you should have boundaries. You should have self-respect. You shouldn't let like a woman treat you badly because you feel like you haven't got any other options. You should kind of put yourself out there and meet people and have different options before you actually make a decision over who's right for you. You shouldn't be a pushover.
Yeah, basic human psychology, isn't it?
Yeah. You don't need like the red pill to learn that. I think it's. I don't think you need to see women as like the enemy to come to those conclusions.
Interesting. Yeah. I think that is. I mean, is it Groucho Marx? I think like I'd never be a member of a club that would have me as a member or something like that. I think there is a real human. Like the more someone wants to be your friend, you start to go, but why would you want to be my friend? Maybe you don't value yourself that highly, and that means you don't value the person who is showering you with gifts. You're like, well, they can't be that great if they're so needy and they're like,
why do they need this to work so badly? Like, what does that say about them? Whereas if someone's a bit more nonchalant, it's like, well, they obviously don't need it to work. They obviously other people find them attractive, so they don't need to. I'm not their only option, which is kind of an unattractive thing. And I think with the red pill stuff, what happens with some of these people is they pursue the pickup stuff. They get into a lot of this stuff now is about status, like presenting like a high status lifestyle on Instagram. It's partly what like the Andrew Tate stuff is about. What they do is they present this themselves in this certain way. So they rent out the Lamborghini, they rent out the Bugatti and get these photo shoots done with it. They get photo shoots so it looks like they're in a private jet. They present this image of themselves that's not really real. And because of that, they attract a certain type of woman. And then when this woman realizes they don't actually have this stuff, she then leaves them. And then they say, oh, all women are like this. Yeah. But they don't realize that they're self-selecting from a very particular type of demographic, both male and female, of people who are only attracted to them, only wanting to be around them because of these superficial things. So it's like they think they've escaped the matrix because they're presenting this lifestyle, and then it's like famous people say they get rich, they get famous, and then all these people come out the woodwork who suddenly want to be their friend. And then they can adopt this very negative view of what people are actually like, but it's not actually what people are like. It's just the people you're attracting because of what you're putting out there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely does. And I know people like that who are doing exactly that kind of thing. It always seems, I guess, a bit pathetic, the whole like faking Bugattis and Lamborghinis and stuff. But I suddenly just, for the first time right now, when you were describing it, I felt like, oh, I want to go and fake having a Lamborghini and take a photo. I've never had that feeling before. I just quite fancy it. Maybe because we're in this sort of like nice surrounding now. I feel like, oh, let's go and pretend we're on a private jet. But to what end? So I've got one more question to ask you, but first tell us where we can get your stuff.
So you can find me on Substack. It's jamesbloodworth.com. That's my Substack. On Twitter, I'm on J_Bloodworth. It's actually X now, not Twitter, but J_Bloodworth. Instagram, James.Bloodworth. My book Hired is in most bookshops, Waterstones, Amazon. And my next book will be out early 2025. So it seems like quite a long time, like it's just over a year's time basically, but these things have publishing has a long like lead time.
Yeah, my book is like 2.5 years. It was mad how long, and it's like, I feel like, God, I've been telling people about it for years and it still isn't out yet, but it's mad. But people, please do go and check out that all of what James said. We're going to put it in the links. Hired is a brilliant book. We spoke about that before, and I'm going to ask you some questions, or one or two questions about that over on Locals. My Locals link will be down below as well, where people can ask questions to the guests. Who's a heretic you admire?
I mean, it's going to be perhaps an obvious one, but George Orwell is a heretic I admire. I think partly because he's someone who is always taking his own temperature. I think this is what Christopher Hitchens said about him. So, who's another heretic I admire. But Orwell was always taking his own temperature, so he was always interrogating his own prejudices first. So in his early books, is someone who made some anti-Semitic comments, for example, but then he didn't lean into that. He was self-aware enough to kind of interrogate where that stuff came from, and then write about it later on to kind of understand where those impulses came from, instead of just pretending that he was wholly good, which is something that he kind of laid into other socialists for believing that, if you're on the side of the good and never interrogating their own prejudice and stuff. I think that's someone who I admire for that, because I think even being a heretic, you can almost fetishize that in a way as well, and you can kind of begin to say things to try and feel superior to other people. So I think we've seen this with some kind of conspiracy theorism in recent years, where you do have people in the heretic space who they start off, questioning received wisdom, which I think is good. But then you get to a point where you're not questioning your new favorite sources. So you're not really being a heretic at all. Yeah,
like having an open mind, but not so open that your brain falls out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's Orwell was someone who took his own temperature. So always kind of being self-aware and monitoring where your own prejudices are coming from and testing them against reality all the time.
Yeah, I love that. Self-awareness, humility, checking your own temperature. Again, we're going to go over to Locals for some more questions. Hit the like and keep watching. Wait, which slide would be? Keep watching this channel.